Welcome to Locked On NBA Game Night for Sunday, November 3rd. I'm Wes Goldberg here with Swipa. Coming up, Luka Doncic and the Mavs stomp the Magic. The Pistons have one problem that they need to clean up, and Jalen Johnson has a career night.
When that final buzzer rings, you know it's time for Locked On NBA Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. It's the true NBA fans' one stop for all the action. Every game, every night. It's Locked On NBA Game Night. Tipping off now.
Welcome to Locked On NBA Game Night. Every game, every night. Wes Goldberg here with Swipa. However, you might be tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app. Thanks for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Got 3 games to get to today, including the Hawks win over the Pelicans, the Pistons win over the Nets. But let's start in Dallas, where the Mavericks beat the Magic rather easily in this one. It was 60-40 at halftime, thanks to Luka Doncic going off for 25 points, including 5 made three-pointers in the first half. Here's Nick Engstadt from Locked On Mavericks with more on how all that went down.
Much-needed win against a short-handed Orlando Magic team, but the story in this one, Luka Doncic is back. He was hitting and firing on all cylinders in this game. He even got his signature technical foul by something that didn't seem like it was deserving of a technical foul. We'll see on that one. But Luka Doncic, 32 points, and got it going early. 14 points in the first quarter. And when he gets his offense going early, it just creates a snowball effect for the rest of the team. Other guys get one-on-one coverage. Luka Doncic gets double looks from help defenders and different things like that. And all of a sudden, this Mavs offense looks like an actual offense again. The Orlando's offense could not get anything going tonight. The Mavs defense was able to stifle them in a bunch of different ways. They just don't have a go-to scorer with Paolo Banchero out, and so they really struggled. But the Mavs bigs, Lively and Gafford, feasted on the small Orlando Magic. Wendell Carter Jr. left this game. He was questionable even coming in, and they just did not have anything to match this Mavericks team.
So, Swipa, what did you make of Luka specifically in that first half in the Mavericks offense?
Well, I think Luka, he's been looking to find a shot to start the year. And, I think for a jump shooter, that's not completely unexpected. I mean, you could be Buddy Hield and you're shooting the lights out, coming into the year, or you could be kind of what Tyrese Maxey is, Luka Doncic, where you're a high volume scorer, but you're trying to figure out how to exactly you want to get your game percolating. And some of this with Luka, it's just kind of getting into shape, with the season. And I'm not even just talking about like physically in shape, but just getting used to playing NBA basketball again with these set of players. And even still, they have been a very good team without that. And so Luka was incredible. He just gets these heaters going where it doesn't matter what kind of defense you're playing. And especially when Luka starts hitting three-pointers and they're like 2-3 feet behind the line and they're those little pass step backs off that right foot, then it's really going to be a long night for you. And I think it really it becomes almost like an avalanche of the team, because once he hits one, you're like, all right, we're probably going to be in for a long night tonight dealing with Luka. And so that's exactly what happened. And then the Magic knew they did not have the horses to keep up. And the Magic, you would think they have Jalen Suggs, KCP, they got Franz. I mean, they got a bunch of defenders. They obviously, even had like one of the best defenders in the league coming off the bench, with Jonathan Isaac. But it just like when Luka gets in his rhythm, he's already so like herky-jerky that it's hard to stay in front of him. And so like he literally got fouled. I think it was right before the quarter ended. He was able to get around and get a layup over Jonathan Isaac. And it was just like Jonathan Isaac's a very good defender. But Luka, when he just gets you like in rhythm, he just gets the timing off. And it just throws you off as a defender, and he did that to the Magic multiple times today. So just an incredible first half for Luka Doncic.
Yeah, when he's walking up the court and just sort of casually launching a 33-footer and it's nothing but net, and then he turns around and starts laughing, that's just mean, man. Like, that's cruel. Yeah. And he's laughing, I think, in part, he's like, I think he's impressed at himself, partly, and I think he's laughing in this particular case because it had been a little bit of a slow start to the year for him. And you even look at the numbers, you just kind of look at the box. It's not that bad, right? But he had a 40-point game, in the opening week, but his percentages have been down, to your point, like 36%, 48%. These last 3 games have been a little bit tougher. There's a 5 for 22 shooting night last week against Utah, a 10 for 27 one. So he comes out and scores, 25 points in the first half, 5 of those on 3-pointers, or 5 made 3-pointers, goes 11 of 22 for 50% shooting overall, 5 of 13 from 3-point range. It was his most efficient scoring night of the year. And you're exactly right. You would think of all the teams to have his best night of the season, it would not be this Orlando Magic team. It would have been some lousy Utah Jazz team or something like that. They tried all of those guys that you talked about, right? Like they put Franz Wagner on him in the post. They had Jalen Suggs hounding him over screens and all this stuff, and it just doesn't work because every time you take something away, he just always finds another something. He finds some weird angle on a step back or some sort of step through, or he starts working the post moves like 11 feet away from the basket. You're like, why is this guy doing turnaround footwork stuff? And it doesn't matter because and he falls away and takes a shot and it goes in. So it's that snowball effect that you and Nick both were talking about there. I think you called it an avalanche. It reminds me of sort of Steph Curry with the Golden State Warriors, right? Like where it just all of a sudden, but it was like that was the whole Warriors team. It was Steph and Klay Thompson, and then eventually Kevin Durant. Luka just does it by himself, seemingly, and it has to be so just morale defeating, just deflating for the other team watching him do that. You can do everything right, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I think especially now being flanked by Kyrie and Klay, and really the thing that makes them so dangerous is the trade they had, right before the All-Star break. When they got Daniil Gafford, and then they also had Derek Lively drafted, obviously in the 2 draft now. And Derek Lively, I think should be starting. I think he's probably their best center, but it's not because Gafford isn't good. Gafford is good. It's just that Lively looks like he can be like an all-star level center at some point. And think about this. You covered the Miami Heat. You've been trying to get a true center outside of Bam for the last several seasons. Derek Lively, off the bench, 11 and 11, 5 of 7, and a plus 25 versus the Orlando Magic. And then Daniil Gafford, 18 and 8, 9 of 13. They just have 2 of the best vertical spacing options. Gafford has a little bit of a post game to him. Derek Lively is a dangerous player as a finisher, and then 2, he's a pretty good connected passer. And I think when you give Luka all right, I got Kyrie, another on-ball creator, spot-up shooter, distributor. I got Klay Thompson now, and now I got Najee Marshall, and I got Derek Lively, and I got Gafford. You just put that together, I think it just puts Luka in such an advantageous situation where he can use all of the things he does really well, which is like masterful driver, masterful post game, masterful step back 3-point shooting game, and then masterful turn this way over the shoulder to the left corner, no look pass to the open 3-point shooter because the defense has collapsed on your driving gravity. Luka Doncic has like generational offensive talent, and he puts it to use better than almost anybody in the NBA. And so I really love the way they have fortified the roster around him to accentuate what he does well. And man, like today again, it's just like, even if the defense is elite, if Luka feels like being Luka Doncic that day, you're more than likely going to lose.
He is maybe the best ticket to buy in the NBA right now because you just never know if it's like, okay, it's just going to be one of these nights, and you kind of know it pretty much right away with him. And so, you're going to be in for an entertaining one, more likely than not. You're exactly right, too, about the roster. I think Nico Harrison has just been nails on this stuff, basically for the last 3 years. I don't know that he's done, basically since the Kyrie Irving trade, I don't know that really, letting Jalen Brunson walk was tough for that Mavericks front office. But then since Nico Harrison took over, made the Kyrie deal, which was very polarizing, we remember at the time, he's aced every single one of these moves, even tanking at the end of the year to get in position to take Derek Lively in that draft. Like, some of it's been a little polarizing, but he's nailed everything, basically. He's hitting 100 or 1,000 or whatever the baseball terminology is. The Orlando Magic, on the other hand, 2 straight losses since Paolo Banchero went out. It's been rough for them offensively. We'll talk a little bit more about what Orlando can do to kind of get out of this rut before moving on to the Hawks win. We'll do that next here on Locked On NBA Game Night. Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to to get something off our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to somebody who's unbiased in your life. Maybe you're having trouble moving up at work, or you've run into a wall in a relationship. Maybe you're anxious, maybe you're sad, and you just don't know why. Therapy could be different for everybody. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team, and it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. Again, BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. We'll be right back. Thanks again for making Locked On NBA your first listen of the day. The best way to support the show, subscribe on YouTube, follow us on your favorite podcast app. Before we get to this Hawks win over the Pelicans, a little bit more on the Orlando Magic. They scored 40 points in that first half, 85 points overall. Could not figure out a way to generate offense consistently, and that's in big part because, well, they're missing their best offensive player in Paolo Banchero. Here's Locked On Magic's Philip Rossman-Reich with more.
This is Philip Rossman-Reich, the host of Locked On Magic, as the Orlando Magic fall to the Dallas Mavericks 108-85. And the score was honestly not as close as that final would indicate. The Orlando Magic right now are quite simply looking for themselves. They're looking for an identity. They're looking for their way to play and their way to win with Paolo Banchero out. Their defense, statistically at least, might look like it's doing fine, but this is not the Orlando Magic we're used to. Jamal Mosley always likes to say that this team plays with a certain amount of joy and a certain amount of energy and pride, for lack of a better way to phrase it, that really defines who they are. Through good times and bad times, that's who this team is. Right now, this team does not have any of that joy. And before we get to any tactics, before we get into any X's and O's to make this team better, the Magic got to find themselves again. They're going to be without Paolo Banchero for the next month and a half. They got to learn to live with it.
So, kind of going back to what we were talking about, Luka sucking the joy maybe out of the Orlando Magic. I'll also say this. I don't see a lot of teams having a lot of fun when they're 9 for 41 from three-point range. That might be the more than anything else. Just teams don't have fun when the shots aren't going in. Not having Paolo Banchero is a big part of what's going on with Orlando, but are you seeing anything else?
Yeah, I mean, even the other day versus Cleveland, they were really running a heavy dose of Jalen Suggs initiation on offense, and that's just not what he is yet at this point in his career. Could he get there? Yeah, I mean, he's very talented, but they don't have an identity offensively. They don't have players either that are ready for that. I mean, Cole Anthony is legitimately like a bench scoring guard. Anthony Black is extremely young. He doesn't even necessarily know exactly who he is yet as a basketball player. And because he's so low on the pecking order, you can't like build the offense around him. And then Franz is a good offensive player, but a very limited. And then you just go up and down their roster. There's just nobody that's like an offensive engine creator. Like, they're just lacking that kind of player. And I even just watching today, if they get down, I mean, they better hit shots. That's really what it comes down to. They better hit a lot of shots, because other than that, they don't have somebody that can consistently drive, consistently kick out, consistently create their own shots, step back threes, operate pick and roll, get downhill, find the lob, find the corner. They just don't have someone that's like able at the highest level when you need to do that. And I think that's really going to be their issue. And so if they run into competent defenses that have some offensive creation on their own end, I just think they're going to struggle with that. And today was another example. I mean, look, Tristan De Silva, I think, has a lot of potential, man. I liked him coming out of the draft. He's super young. But again, it's like still like in parts, he just cannot like take over a game yet.
Well, this is supposed to be Franz's job. This is where Franz is supposed to step up. And you look at him, 6 of 15 tonight for 13 points. And the most glaring thing to me, 0 free throw attempts. And that was sort of where Paolo makes so much of his money, right, is at the free throw line. And that's also an indicator of, hey, this guy's putting pressure on the defense. He's getting guys into foul trouble. And all that stuff is what he's generating for him and his offense. And Franz just wasn't really a generator. His usage rate was at like 28% in this game. But you never felt like he was taking over the offense. And to your point, like, if Mosley feels like he has to run a lot of his offense through Jalen Suggs instead of Franz Wagner, maybe that's everything that you need to know. And this is going to be a big test for Wagner while and for however long Paolo is out. But let's go to New Orleans, where the Pelicans lost to the Hawks 126 to 111. The Hawks were led by Jalen Johnson, who had a near triple-double. Get this stat line here. 29 points, 9 rebounds, 8 assists, also 2 steals and 2 blocks. Here's Brad Rowland from Locked On Hawks with more.
This is Brad Rowland, host of the Locked On Hawks podcast, and the Hawks snap their 4-game losing streak with a pretty solid victory on the road in New Orleans. This is the game that I dubbed the Injury Bowl, as both teams were without large portions of the rotation, including a late scratch of Zion Williamson in this game, making things easier for the Hawks, to be sure. But Atlanta played very well, particularly in the second half. A really almost career-best night from Jalen Johnson with 29 points, 9 rebounds, 8 assists. Trae Young was awesome in the second half of this game. Dyson Daniels and Larry Nance Jr. had a lot of fun in their return to New Orleans, and the Hawks played just very well. Their best and most complete game really all season long. So with this win, the Hawks have a tough challenge on Monday, going to Boston to face the Celtics. But given all the injury stuff, this is an important win for the Hawks, to be sure, to stop the bleeding a little bit and get the vibes back up in advance of the game against Boston. We'll have a full breakdown of this game and much more on the Locked On Hawks podcast.
Do you agree with Brad there that despite all these injuries, this was an impressive or maybe even an important win for Atlanta?
It's important in that they needed to get it, and there's no Zion, so you need to win that game. And Trae Young's been pretty good, I would say, most of the year. He had another 23 and 12 night tonight. I'm going to say this. I think I can see the Hawks' vision. Zachary Ricochet with Jalen Johnson and Trae Young. It makes sense. Like, it makes sense what they're trying to do. And then on top of that, Wes, add Dyson Daniels, who's a legitimate, tall, two-way guard that can get up in your face, that can come off of a screen. Man, he just has the tangible stuff. This is what if they would have waited just a couple of seasons and said, we're not going to trade for DeJounte Murray, we're going to go after a young player that doesn't have any injury concerns you got to worry about, that can fill that two-guard role next to Trae Young, Dyson Daniels has been perfect for this team. Well, it's so crazy how you'll make these trades and teams are just willing to let go these young two-way guards that are like big players that can do a lot of different things.
I hated that the New Orleans Pelicans made that trade. I'm like, I kind of like Dyson Daniels more at this salary slot, getting him on this rookie scale contract at his age, more than DeJounte Murray. I don't know that DeJounte Murray's had 1 good year of being 1 year of being a good defender. He's been an inefficient scorer for most of his career. I like DeJounte Murray just fine, but if you're the Pelicans and you're watching that Hawks and you're watching that opponent, and you're like, we let this guy go.
Yeah.
And he's been playing. And by the way, this wasn't just some sort of Dyson Daniels revenge game. He's been doing this all year.
Yeah.
Like he's going to probably make an all defensive team.
And then add in Larry Nance with that. Like, you
nice
get a real core. Like, they get a real defensive core around Trae Young. And but you understand, like, you see the length. They got Dyson Daniels, Larry Nance, Zachary Ricochet, and Jalen Johnson with Trae Young. For me, that's a really, really solid core to build around.
And I was down on Ricochet. I did not understand why he was even in the conversation for the number 1 pick. There's a lot of guys that I liked in this draft. I did not understand the Ricochet thing, and I've been wrong. And this was not even a good night for him. He was 4 of 13 overall, 1 of 5 from three-point range. But watching him throughout the season, this guy is a shooter for sure. The length is for real, and he does some of those little in-between things, right? He's like diving for loose balls. He's in the right place at the right time. There's obviously things that he needs to get better at, but that looks like it's going to be a hit for them. Even if he's not the star of the team, they don't need that. They have their star. They have Trae Young, and they have some other guys that obviously can help. So it's been this is the maybe my favorite Hawks team in the Trae Young era.
Since the 21 year?
Yeah, I think so. And I think I even like this team more than the 2021 year where they made that Eastern Conference Finals run. I think the roster just makes way more sense than it ever has, especially around Trae.
Remember, it was so funny. They were trying to get off John Collins for so long, right? And it's like as soon as they do it, we're a year and a half basically removed from that. And, oh, wait, Jalen Johnson, Zach, like we got some wings now that and Zach, he can like be a defender. Like they have players, everybody in their roster can be a defender next to Trae Young, and I think that's what's going to make it work. And let's project them a couple of months from now, 3 months from now. This could be a team that, like, look, they get into the playoff window. I'm not saying they're going to beat anybody, but in terms of pushing you to the brink, that could definitely be this Hawks team. Conceptually, I love their roster, and I love what even the effort they showed tonight. And what I love is like when they get in transition, this team can go. They have flyers, they got shooters, and Trae Young is probably the best half-court lob passer I have seen this side of CP3 in my life.
Well, let's go to the other side of this. The New Orleans Pelicans, we're without Zion Williamson. We're going to talk about where they stand and what we can make out of their loss in this game, which some people almost call it a win if you listen to the Locked On Pelicans host. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On NBA Game Night. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We'll be right back. Thanks again for making Locked On NBA Game Night your first listen of the day. Support us by subscribing on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app. So the Pelicans lose that game to the Hawks. They were without Zion Williamson, a late scratch because of a hamstring strain. They're still missing DeJounte Murray, still missing CJ McCollum, still no Herb Jones, still no Trey Murphy. So it's not surprising that they lost this game and they've dropped to 3-4. But Jake Madison from Locked On Pelicans found a silver lining in this loss. We'll hear from him right now.
Moral victories don't count in the wins column, but the Pelicans certainly got one in their 126-111 loss to the Atlanta Hawks. Look, it's hard to win when you're down 5 of your top 6 players, including Zion Williamson, who's a late scratch with hamstring soreness. And while the final score doesn't show it, the Pelicans were competitive in this one. After looking lifeless on a 4-game road trip, the Pelicans needed a spark, and now that they're at home, they definitely found it. They certainly had it in a win over the Indiana Pacers on Friday and looked overall pretty good in this one against Atlanta. Brandon Ingram had 32 points, including taking 8 threes. He's been phenomenal recently. The coaching staff found ways to get Jordan Hawkins open for looks. Brandon Boston Jr. on a 2-way deal played well off the bench. For a team as injured as the Pelicans, I don't necessarily expect wins, but I do expect them to fight, to run sets, to compete. They did that tonight, and that's good enough for me.
All right, so moral victories from Jake Madison there, and I can't disagree with them, considering everything that this team is dealing with, all the injuries and stuff. Here's where I really want to focus and kind of steer the conversation. Brandon Ingram has been good this year. Like he really stood out in this game. He was the best player on the court for the Pelicans. And part of me is thinking like, all right, like what kind of take can I come off of this game with? And I'm like, somebody should trade for Brandon Ingram. He was the guy that it was sort of untradeable on this. He's looking for the extension, all these things. Like he's been really good. And then I was thinking, the Pelicans can't afford to trade Brandon Ingram right now. They have too many guys that are hurt. And he was basically their only version of offense. He was bringing the ball up. He was essentially the point guard in this game. And if this team is just going to be injured like they are, even with Zion in and out of the lineup, like no CJ McCollum, no DeJounte Murray, no Trey Murphy, no Herb Jones, like these guys who have been on the ball, they need somebody like Brandon Ingram. And fortunately, they have Brandon Ingram. So is he kind of like untradeable for New Orleans weirdly right now?
No, they should absolutely trade him as soon as they get the value for him. It's not to slight to Brandon. Brandon's a good player, but they're at the same point that the Hawks were with John Collins. Like the core doesn't work. They're not dominant when Zion and Brandon were on the court together. And again, in the Western Conference, who are you beating if your top 2 players are Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson? Not many people. Now, they did push the Lakers in the play-in, but remember, Brandon wasn't playing down the stretch of that game. So I think some of this is just they have, I think, the core player, which is Zion. And then around Zion, you need to be building. So Messi is there to help Zion, so he doesn't have to play the 5. Okay, well then outside of that, Herb Jones is there to help Zion, to be a play finisher and to be the defender on the perimeter. Trey Murphy is there to help Zion, to be a play finisher, the 3-point shooter, and a lob and a rim runner, but then also to be a good defensive player. And so for me, it's like you have your identity, you know what you want to do, just do it. Trade Brandon, get real value for him. The same thing that you did with DeJounte Murray. And so, Wes, that's just where I'm at. I just think that as good as he is, there's clearly a ceiling with your team. And if you're really going to buy all into the Zion Wilson experiment, then it's just time to do it.
If you could get that value for him, I would say do it. But they clearly weren't able to do that in the summer. And maybe you are able to do it now after he showed out. Like, he's been playing well, like I said. So maybe there's something that shakes loose in the NBA that wasn't there before. But if you're not able to get real value from him, I actually think there's some value in just letting him walk. Just be like, all right, we have you for a year. We're dealing with all of these injuries. And if we don't get anything for you, that's okay. Like, we still want to stay above. There's some value in saying we're dealing with all these injuries right now. Let's just make sure we keep our heads above water until we get healthy. And then, hey, maybe that happens by February and you're healthy, and then you could trade him in February. But for right now, I would say, like, I wouldn't even be taking the phone calls because we just need somebody to help us stay in some of these games. I know they obviously lost this one, but I agree with Jake. Despite the score, I thought this was actually pretty close for the most of the Atlanta ends up going like on a 14-0 run in the beginning of the fourth quarter, and that just sort of blew the game open. But it was the most competitive game of the night for a while. So I don't know. We'll see. You're right that Brandon Ingram does not have a future in New Orleans, but I just wonder, it's like, okay, maybe there's some value in just holding on to him for a little bit longer while you're dealing with these injuries. But let's go on to our final game of the night. The Pistons went into Brooklyn, blew out the Nets 106-92, but Khalil from Locked On Pistons says they shouldn't use it as a model for how this young team wants to play going forward.
Win for your Detroit Pistons. Host of Locked On Pistons podcast, Kuka Hill here. The Detroit Pistons walk out of Brooklyn with a win, 106-92. When you're the Detroit Pistons, you take any win possible. It doesn't matter how it looks. If you can get a win, you're just happy you got a win. However, with that said, while they do move to 2-5, this was a very sloppy win from your Detroit Pistons. That first half was one of the roughest basketball games I've watched all year. The Detroit Pistons continue to have turnover problems. Cade Cunningham had 7 turnovers himself, continues to have some turnover issues to start this year. Jaden Ivey had 4 turnovers. Jalen Duren had 4 turnovers. They, in total, had 17 turnovers as a team. They shot 30% from deep. So, did they get the win? Yes. But if they want to have a good month of November with their schedule softening up, they need to play much better than this. Clean up their act turnover-wise and also hit open shots more often than not. Something they haven't been able to do so far, but you'll take the win.
What do you think about this young Pistons team? Because this is the turnovers to me is the big thing with them, right? They're second in the league in committing turnovers, but they're young. And I think part of that of what Ku is saying there, it's like, yeah, don't turn the ball over so much, hit open shots, play with more poise. Those are not things I expect a young basketball team to do, but I love a lot of the talent on this Pistons team. They're like an 18-year-old whose rich parents give him a McLaren for his first car, and then he just drives it into a tree on his first day. Like, there's obviously something here to work with, but they're young, and once they figure out how to use their talent, I think they could be pretty good. But right now, I think they're pretty far from that, which, again, is expected.
Yeah, I think the Pistons are incredibly talented. I actually really like Cade Cunningham. I think that he's been put in a very bad situation the moment he got there. I think the Monty Williams signing, I think that the team around him, it just didn't make a lot of sense. I think the team has struggled to form an identity, but they're starting to put a picture together. I think Jaden Ivey works. I think Asur Thompson works with this. I think Jalen Duren works with them. So it's really about maximizing them and learning how to play around Cade Cunningham and really what he needs to accentuate his game. But this is just going to be a struggle all year. That team is just not uber talented, and so they're just having to kind of make it work. But also, like the Brooklyn Nets, this is a good win because the Nets have been putting it on people. They have either hung in game they shouldn't be hanging in for most people, or they've beaten teams like the Bucks, who people think are just worse than. So I still think they deserve credit for it, but I just think that the Pistons right now, a lot of what they're doing is trying to establish a culture and establish a play style. And I think once they get there, I think a lot of Pistons fans will be very happy with the product, but it's just probably going to take a little bit longer than a year or two to get there.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what JB Bickerstaff has done with that team this year has been really good. I think that he's established an identity. There's organizational principles, basically what they didn't have under Monty Williams. Like, his decision to make sure that, like, this is not a team that has a ton of shooting on the roster, but whatever shooting they have, he's putting as much of it on the floor as he can at all times, right? You always have one or two of their shooters, quote-unquote shooters, out on there on the court at any given time. Letting Jaden Ivey run some offense so that Cade can work off the ball a little bit more, I think has been really helpful for them. You've seen Jalen Duren get more involved in the offense as a play finisher and as a lob threat as this, the season has shortly gone on here. So I like what I'm seeing from this Pistons team, but I'm with you. I'm a Cade guy. I love watching him play, and when I watch him play, I think he's better than he probably is because he looks like a player that I would like. But you look at his numbers, I'm like, this guy turns the ball over all the time. The shooting percentage isn't where it needs to be, especially as a finisher, given his size. It's just he's not as efficient as you would assume he would be. He looks like a better player than he is, and I still want to believe in him, and I do believe him, and I think he's going to get there. But he needs to clean up the turnovers, and he needs to learn how to finish at the basket more. He had more of his shots blocked than any player at his size last year. Like he gets a lot of his own shots blocked and so I think there's stuff that they can clean up. But again, they're young, and I do think that Cade is in a better situation than he's ever been this year.
Which isn't saying a lot. I mean, this is one of the worst teams in the league.
It's not. But there's a lot of guys that I like on this roster, and I keep finding myself watching the Detroit Pistons this year. That wraps up Locked On NBA Game Night. Every game, every night. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, Odyssey, and wherever you get your podcasts.